Hello there, this is Network Africa. Coming up on today's program, President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria is in China. We bring you the latest about what's on his agenda. We're trailing what will be discussed on this week-long visit. One thing President Obama regrets is not having more time in government or the ever-adamant Senate. It's Libya. Later, Egypt remains optimistic that its tourism industry can make a comeback despite the poor statistics. Thanks for joining us on the program. I am Amarachi Ubani. Just before we fill you in on the latest regarding President Buhari's visit to China, here's a quick summary of what made headlines on the African continent this weekend.
At least 3 people have been killed in a car bombing outside a restaurant in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, on Saturday. The blast occurred at lunchtime near the small but busy restaurant located in Beliani village, Civis district. 5 other people are wounded in the attack, but police are still investigating the incident. Finally, political parties in South Africa have been crisscrossing the country to encourage more citizens, particularly young people, to sign up to vote in August local government elections. The Independent Electoral Commission said more than 3 million first-time voters registered back in March, but around 8 million people still need to formally register. Statistics show 80% of this figure are young people, and so political parties have been frantically calling on first-time voters to register during the registration weekend of April the 9th and 10th.
Our democracy is based on the participation of our people. So it's very important for people to come so that even when they're not happy, they can rightfully claim that they've got a right to shake the government to deliver on issues that they feel that we don't deliver. But it's very important as well to come and exercise their choice.
We are mobilizing society and we are saying the power is in your hands. And we've got to today register to vote for change so that we can change the future of this country. There can be no time in South Africa that's more important than this time.
Over 22,000 voting stations were opened at the weekend, allowing citizens to register.
President Muhammadu Buhari is currently meeting with his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, in China. We understand he'll be in China for the most of this week. But here's what's on the agenda for President Buhari. It's the signing of trade and investment deals. We understand several new agreements and memorandum of understanding will be concluded and signed on boosting trade and economic relations between Nigeria and China. Also, there'll be dialogue between both presidents. As we said, they'll both be discussing the development of Nigeria's infrastructure, especially in power, roads, railways, aviation, water supply, and the housing sectors. Then, securing of loans to plug $10 billion deficit in Nigeria's budget. Also, both will be discussing investments and improvements in Nigeria's agriculture, as well as issuing of Chinese-backed bonds. President Buhari will be meeting with the China-Nigeria Business Investment Forum and members of the Nigeria community in China before returning to Abuja by the weekend. It doesn't happen very often that the United States admits it regrets past action, but that has happened today. And the regret is being felt by the U.S. President himself. According to President Barack Obama, who shared his stance during a Fox News interview, he said the worst mistake of his presidency was likely a lack of planning for the aftermath of the overthrow of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi by NATO-backed forces in 2011. The President said exactly, probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya. Libya has been in utter chaos since Colonel Gaddafi was killed, with rival governments and militias fighting for power. President Obama is due to hand over power later this year, and with elections coming up, they will be handing over power next year, beg your pardon. So he does have a few things I guess he does regret. Joining us now to discuss this is a blogger at Vox Peccavi. in London. He's also a British Reserve officer. Pt.1, who joins us now. Pt, thank you for joining us on Network Africa to discuss President Barack Obama's regret. What do you think? Do you think the U.S. really has any regrets about what happened in Libya?
I would say yes. The United States, or President Obama in particular, has great regrets about Libya. If you look at the way the operation was conducted, operationally it was very successful. The NATO powers, United States, France, Italy, and their Gulf Arab allies conducted, a fairly textbook operation using air power and special forces to overthrow a fairly powerful and entrenched, regime with minimal casualties to themselves. So operationally, it was very, very successful, but strategically, the operation has, turned into a disaster. Large portions of Libya are now overrun by either different factions, different governments, or terrorist factions, exporting terror, to Nigeria, to Tunisia, and sending people across, in waves of migration up into Europe. So, from President Obama's point of view, it's a massive strategic failure because, although Gaddafi's regime was unpalatable, it was stable, and it produced or was providing a sort of bulwark against terrorism, illegal migration, narcotic smuggling, and all these kind of crimes that are now affecting southern Europe.
Chidi, this reminds one of the U.S. Stepping into situations such as Iraq and now what's going on in Syria. Is there any way the U.S. could have approached the situation in Libya differently so that it could have provided a different result? And could they be making the same mistake with Syria and again Iraq?
Again, your comment is extremely prescient, and if you listen to President Obama's comments or read some of his interviews or writings since then, you'll see that in the attempts to go into Libya, they actually tried to correct a lot of the mistakes that were made during the invasion of Iraq. So rather than going in unilaterally, they built a coalition around the European powers, France and Italy. Rather than going in without UN approval, they got a UN mandate. They tried to engage with local stakeholders, the African Union, the Arab states. They didn't go in heavy-handed. They used very minimalist force, air power, select special forces, as minimalist as possible, and then they always try to have a local face to it, making sure that the local rebels had a face of, were the face of the operation. They tried to minimize all those mistakes, but as I said, strategically, after they'd won the actual intervention, after they defeated Gaddafi's forces, had Gaddafi himself been captured and executed, rather than going in and securing the peace, as it's referred to, as in stabilizing the situation, President Obama himself, refers to it as the powers of tribalism. They underestimated the power of the Libyan tribes to refuse to work together. A very common problem that we see in Africa, where tribes refuse to work for the common interest and work for selfish interests. And then at the same time, the European powers, France and Italy, rather than following up, with their initial very, very aggressive stance, we kind of step back. The same with the United Kingdom. They step back from actually providing any sort of stability, any sort of, either moral or physical or military leadership to make sure Libya didn't sink into where it is now. In trying to avoid the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan, I think that informs a lot of President Obama and the United States' approach to Syria. They're very keen not to get involved, very keen not to deploy large ground forces, very keen not to be seen to be responsible for a future that doesn't pan out the way that is predicted to be. And that legacy of Iraq and Afghanistan is going to reverberate all the way through any further interventions in the Middle East in particular and the wider world in general.
Chidi, now that the damage has already been done in Libya, you have two parallel governments. You have rebel groups who are trying to take over oil wells. You have other rebel groups trying to lay hold of power. What's the solution now that you think will be preferable in Libya? How does the UN help to how does the US, beg your pardon, help to correct this wrong, correct the situation it has created?
The interesting thing is that if you paraphrase maybe what Colin Powell said, prior to the second Gulf War, if you break it, you own it. the United States can argue quite legitimately that, or with a certain element of legitimacy, that they didn't actually break Libya. Libya was broken by a coalition which they were part of, and also by the Libyans themselves. That doesn't really help the situation because, as we know in Nigeria, a lot of the weapons that are coming down to Boko Haram are coming from Libya. A lot of the weapons going to Syria are coming from Libya. Tunisia is being destabilized by Libya. So a solution has to be found. And I think that solution is, unfortunately going to have to be some sort of a presence, a military presence, to stabilize, the accepted or the internationally accepted government in Libya. And as is happening now, a strong special forces action with drone strikes in US and allied airstrikes against, terrorist groups. It's happening now. It's not very, how will I put it? It's not very open and it's a little bit messy, but it's the only way that you're going to stabilize the situation, or by supporting, making sure the Libyans coalesce around one government, put aside, the issues of tribalism and move forward in a united manner. The African Union, the Gulf states, the Gulf Cooperation Council and other states also need to play a part in this, because without regional backing, it's always going to be foreign powers, Western powers, European and North American powers intervening in what is essentially an African and Arab problem. And it's never going to work.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and helping us to understand this better. Chidi, thank you for joining us on Network Africa. Still to come on the program, President Al-Sisi of Egypt says thank you to Saudi Arabia by giving them 2 islands. Find out more when we return.